Hi, I'm Laura Lawton with Lawton Printing Services. Welcome to Candidate Confidential. We're happy to have you join us. We're happy to join Spokane Talks Online for this important civic service. The Lawton team has been serving the Inland Northwest for over 77 years. What keeps us motivated is the continuous evolution of our company to better serve the clients we work with every day. We are also fortunate to have so many people willing to step up to serve our communities. Being a candidate and civil servant is too often a thankless job. I know you join me in thanking these forward-thinking individuals for their dedication to us all. With that, I thank you for taking the time to learn more about the people who want to lead our communities. Enjoy the debate and give Lawton a call for any of your marketing, printing, or mailing needs. Thank you.
Welcome to Candidate Confidential on Spokane Talks Online. I'm John Allison, your host, and today I'm joined by two candidates for the Spokane Public Schools Board, Mike Weiser and Jennifer Thomas. After this short break, we'll get right to the questions.
Proposition 2 is not about politics. It's about protecting Spokane's economy.
I'm opposed to Proposition 2.
I'm opposed to Prop 2.
I'm opposed to Proposition 2.
Proposition 2 just doesn't make sense.
I am opposing Proposition 2.
I'm against Proposition 2.
I'm opposed to Proposition 2.
I'm opposed to Prop 2 because we have to protect Spokane's economy.
Back with Candidate Confidential and two candidates for the Spokane Public Schools Board, Mike Weiser and Jennifer Thomas. Mr. Weiser won a coin toss. He answers the first question, which of course must deal with funding of schools in Washington in the wake of the McCleary decision by the state Supreme Court, which mandates full funding of schools and the legislature's purported fix over the summer. Mr. Weiser, what is your assessment of that fix and whether Spokane Public Schools will be helped or hurt by it?
Well, I think it's a step in the right direction for Spokane Public Schools. Not every district across the state is an equal winner in this new funding model. We're going to get about an extra $30 million next year. That's about a 7.5% increase. So that's a good thing. It gets us on a way to meeting the requirements of basic education and starting to lower class sizes. But what it doesn't yet do is get us all the way to meeting the vision, I think, that most folks have for lowering class sizes and funding basic education. Specifically, you're trying to get down to a 17 student classroom size from K-3. We're starting to approach that. This funding helps, but it doesn't get us there. We have some bargaining contracts where we're able to increase staff by about 2.6%, even though we're getting 7.5% more income this next year, because a lot of that money is going to catch up in terms of wages and salaries for staff and teachers. We're trying to catch up from the recession to make sure we're able to pay teachers enough to recruit good folks. So I think what citizens need to understand is that while I think we can offer great education, this is a step in the right direction for Spokane. If your goal is 17 students max in a classroom for K-3, it won't quite get us there.
Ms. Thomas, what do you think the school board needs to do in the wake of the new money coming in?
Yes, I agree that we're moving in the right direction. I think that we need to look at lots of programs that we have on the books currently, make sure that they're beneficial and that we're getting the outcomes that we're wanting from them, and places where we can trim back, implement new processes, hire more staff, create classrooms that have safe spaces in them or safe space classrooms outside of the original classroom. All of those are things that I would be looking at moving forward, and the additional money is helpful.
Mr. Weiser, there's already challenges from the advocates for special ed, saying that special ed is already suffering and will not be helped, and in fact, more hurt by this purported fix. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we did get a little bit of a lift in terms of the funding for special ed. Spokane Schools has had, I think, over 50% of our students with special ed instruction requirements, and the state had capped the extra funding at 13.5%. So they just kind of assumed that most districts won't have more than 13.5% of their kids who have special needs. We have more than that. We still have a little bit more than what the state has upped the funding for. But I think we're getting a lot closer. I think, to me, it's more of a question of us implementing best practices around special education. There is a study that was commissioned this calendar year that we should get the report on from the Urban Collaborative in the next month or so. I think that should really inform for Spokane what we need to do to improve our special education.
Ms. Thomas, the district had to use levy money to fund special ed recently. What are your thoughts on the state of special ed in the district in the wake of this fix by the legislature?
I agree. We need to make sure that we're focusing on the needs of special ed children and supporting educators in that capacity and parents. And as far as levy dollars go, I think that it's wise that we're using money that's not based off of levies, because every community doesn't have levies to support the extra programs like special education for kids.
Mr. Weiser, if you had a magic wand, where would you take money from a place where it's being spent now and shift it to a new place within the district?
That's a good question. I think school districts, and Spokane's no different, tend to spend every dollar they have, whether it's food services or transportation or additional programs. I haven't seen, being on the board about 6 months now, I haven't seen where there is truly a program that is just simply a waste of money. The superintendent, and I really want the board to go this direction too, are putting in place some program evaluations in a more standardized way, so that each year we can kind of set some measures behind all of our special programs, whether it's highly capable or special needs or sports. And I think I look forward to seeing a little bit more rigor in terms of evaluating those programs, but right now, no.
And Ms. Thomas, if you had that power to take money from one place in the budget and put it somewhere else, would you do that?
Yes, specifically for me, looking at community resource officers and wanting to utilize other options that might be available to us, but there's twice as much money spent on community resource officers in the Spokane School District as in the Seattle School District, with a smaller population. And I think that we could look at, instead of disciplining kids harder, find ways to support programs with some of that money.
There's been talk around the state of what is termed sometimes an achievement gap in Washington and probably in many other states. Mr. Weiser, do you agree there is a gap, an achievement gap in the public schools in Spokane now? And if so, what are your thoughts on closing that?
There is certainly. It's really too easy to look at a zip code of where a student grows up and predict what their educational outcomes are going to be, or even what their kind of love of education is, just based on where they live. And it could be because that's a low-income neighborhood. It could be there's lots of students of color in that neighborhood. But there are specific gaps that I think we can continue to further address. It's not up to the school system alone to address those gaps. When you're talking about generational poverty and a student coming into kindergarten just really not being able to sit still in class because they haven't had a preschool experience, you're not going to be able to, in a K-12 environment, close that gap entirely. But I think there are things we can do. We are a portfolio school in Spokane, which means we offer different choices for parents to choose how to educate their children in a way that suits their needs. I think we can go further on that, and we can go further in piloting some things like more year-round education, where you don't lose that learning over the summertime break, and things like extended school days. I think we can pilot those sorts of activities and make those available to our community.
Ms. Thomas, achievement gaps within the school district, do you agree they exist, and what would you do to fix it?
Absolutely. I am a parent who utilized the ECAP program, Early Childhood Education Access Program. And when I look at early education, I think that the studies that show that every dollar you spend in early ed saves $7 down the road are absolutely accurate. When we're looking at achievement gaps, it's not just about making sure that all kids have equal access to the same education, but that we are helping kids who start behind catch up to an equal starting point, so that we can get everybody to the same goal of graduation in the same timeline.
Let me ask you both about charter schools. First, Mr. Weiser, provide your assessment of how the charter schools in Spokane have worked and how you will be advocating in the future with regard to more charter schools or what we do with the ones we have.
So I do like the way Spokane's chosen to authorize charter schools. I like the two that we've chosen have been community-based nonprofits that do fill clear gaps that the school district wanted to fill with option programs, but charters could do that more quickly. I think they have had some struggles, just both schools being run by folks who haven't been superintendents and leaders of schools. So they've Pride Prep is changing their curriculum. Spokane International is moving locations and expanding. So they're going through growing pains, but the cool thing to see is that they can react really quickly when something doesn't work well. For example, I was at Spokane International Academy last week just visiting. They were using this online program for Spanish language education. The kids wasn't resonating with the kids. They decided to kill that, hire an extra Spanish educator the following school year. That might have taken another year or so in the public school system to do that, so it's nice that they have that flexibility to innovate. However, I would worry that if we get too many more charter schools that it becomes a little bit too complicated for parents to understand what the options are. I'd rather see the options be in the public school system, so I'd like us to be more innovative, to learn from those experiences, and when I say us, Spokane Public Schools, and add our own options that are needed.
Ms. Thomas, your thoughts on charter schools and their future in Spokane?
Mm-hmm. I like charter schools. I like the way Spokane Public Schools has done charter schools, and not being on the board, I don't see charter schools as a us versus them. I see it as a part of the overall Spokane public school system, and that public funds are being used for charter schools with oversight. Even though they have their own board, the Spokane Public School Board still oversees the charter school board and has a final say on some of those decisions. So I, as a parent, love the fact that there would be more options for how I would want to have my kids educated. And sometimes I use the example, all of my kids have food allergies, so if the local grocery store in my neighborhood didn't have the food I needed to feed my kids so that they would be healthy and thriving, and I didn't have an option to go to another grocery store across town, even if I was driving there myself and all of those other things, if I didn't have if I wasn't able to access something else to help them, there would be an outcry. And so in public education, yes, we need to make our local neighborhood schools strong, but there still should be choices for parents.
Are there ways to avoid impacting the public schools if you add other charter schools?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, what I have seen are parents, once given an option to get into the lottery system for the charter school or not, it engages them in their child's education. So maybe before where they were disengaged, or they thought that this is my only option and there's nothing I can do. Now they've stepped up to a place of there is something I can do. I do have a voice. And so whether they're more involved in their local school's classroom or just even helping with homework at home at night, I love that there is more discussion around options for kids in their education.
And Mr. Weiser, your thoughts about fiscal impact if other charter schools are added?
Well, I think Spokane Schools is a large district, and so if you think about the total enrollment at our two schools is, I think, maybe around 1,000 right now. Another couple of charter schools really isn't going to have a big difference to Spokane Public Schools. So I wouldn't really worry too much about that unless it became multiple thousands of students in those charter schools.
Over the past week or so, obviously, student safety has been fresh on the minds of all parents. Ms. Thomas, turning to you, what are your thoughts about the state of student safety at schools, and are there things that you would advocate for as a change if you're elected?
Mm-hmm. Yes. The interesting thing about school safety and the culture, the atmosphere in the current schools is that unfortunately, parents and educators were the ones who were most shaken and disturbed, I think, by the shooting at Freeman a couple weeks ago. For me, being at Rogers High School the day after the shooting at Freeman and talking with other high school students outside of Rogers about what happened, it was heartbreaking to recognize that for students, school safety and just the violent feel, that kind of underlying feel, is a normal thing for them on a regular basis. So it's not shocking. It would be like how we used to practice fire drills. These days, not only are there fire drills, but there's safety drills. And As a parent and as most educators, who grew up prior to when safety drills were implemented, for them, it's just a normal thing, like there might be a fire in the school. We need to make sure that we're looking at mental health as a true illness and not just as a child who has a problem. So if this were any other illness and a child was allowed to go back to school with a fever and a rash and visible signs that you could see, it would never be tolerated. Mental illness, you can't see it as clearly, and so we need to find ways that we're making sure that students who have this illness are taken care of.
Mr. Weiser, are there any particular programs or steps that you feel the district needs to take to ensure student safety, or are you satisfied with what's being done today?
I think from a physical safety perspective, there's been some great steps in the last couple of years, such as single point of entry. This school year, every school has that, which means if you come to school outside of the opening bell, you have to buzz in, and the school office has to look at you and let you in. That's obviously not a corrective action for the type of incident we saw at Freeman. We do have good mental health support in our schools, good counseling. We've added some counselors this last year, 5 across to support 10 of the lowest income schools. I think that's a step in the right direction. I think what we could continue to add resources. What I would rather see is us linking the school district to other resources and making it more of a accepted part of life, that, hey, it'd be good if you saw a counselor outside of school if there aren't that sort of resource in your school at that particular time. But what I would like to see a focus on, what I'm an advocate for, is continuing to roll out restorative practices and positive behavior interventions and supports. These are both frameworks that schools have started to adopt, but not every school has gone all the way to adopt them. They improve school climate. They make sure that students know how to behave, what's expected of them, what the impact of bullying is, and they provide tools to deal with personal conflicts so that students won't feel as ostracized in some cases or left out.
Ms. Thomas, school districts around the country have had a lot of attention placed on the idea of bullying, whether physical bullying or cyberbullying. How do you feel the Spokane Public Schools has handled the bullying issue over the past few years, and are there any specific steps you would change or steps you would take if you were elected?
Yeah, I think that Spokane Public Schools is doing a good job at having conversations around bullying and having a supportive environment. I would probably, so I sit on the Spokane Human Rights Commission. Something that we have been in the practice of is having courageous conversations. And so I think that it might be an interesting idea to actually go to schools and have some courageous conversations and find out, how is bullying affecting you or not affecting you in this environment, and ask students to really collaborate on how can you create a culture that you want to go to school in, that's supportive to you and that's beneficial. It's just another step to helping remind them that their lifelong learning process doesn't stop when they graduate, but that they're going to be members of a community, and so engaging them in a community while they're in school.
Mr. Weiser, bullying is a pretty wide concept or topic, encompasses a lot of things, but what are your thoughts about the public schools in Spokane and how it's been addressed, and do you think there's room for improvement? If so, what?
I think that gets back to what I was talking about with the positive behavior interventions and supports, and setting aside time each week with students, especially at younger ages, to talk about the impact of bullying, to talk about expectations for behaviors. So I think it goes back to that as a clear focus that we can take. But I would say that nationally, bullying is actually down over the last few decades. So students are more aware of their actions, of it's less acceptable to be a bully than it was before. But we are in a situation where some types of bullying can have a much stronger impact maybe than folks realize. Comments that might be thought of as teasing somebody might be taken to heart. So again, it gets back to that. Teaching kids, specifically setting aside time to talk to kids about those sorts of things.
So, Ms. Thomas, if you're elected and you sit on the board following the election, what are the first 2 things that are going to be paramount in your mind as a school board member, the things you're going to want to work on the most?
I'm going to want to take a look at the 14% that are not graduating and make sure that we are really targeting our efforts at supporting those students, supporting those schools, and the communities. So is it one specific school? Is it one specific zip code? What can we do to refocus some of the money, some of the resources, that type of thing? Also, I think that I would more aggressively push for internship and apprenticeship programs within Spokane Public Schools. So right now where we have the T24, which is technical colleges, 2-year and 4-year programs, or trade schools, I mean. I think that it would be very beneficial to bring in other options for students. So when they feel like the traditional learning setting isn't for them and we're trying to encourage them to do more classroom traditional settings, to give them options that are outside of the normal type of learning.
Mr. Weiser, if you are retained, your primary 1 or 2 issues that will be forefront on your mind.
Sure. Well, a big one that I've been surprised hasn't come up as much because the board made a big decision in July to switch to a middle school configuration that would be 6, 7, 8 instead of our current junior high sort of 7, 8 model. That is going to have a lot of downstream implications. We have to look at looking at our boundaries for our middle schools especially, and we got a lot of community input to make that decision. It was the right decision to go to that model. But it's not just a matter of throwing 6th graders into middle school. We have to be really, really thoughtful about what that educational model is. Things like having wings of junior highs that are set aside for 6th graders, so they're not necessarily always around the 8th graders, and that sort of influence. And then the boundaries is just always going to be, we haven't changed boundaries in decades and decades, so that's going to be a huge, huge, huge challenge. Other than that, I think it gets back to looking at the goals that were set in the strategic plan, and I'm kind of a data guy, and I like to make sure that when the board says, hey, we should improve graduation rate, and the superintendent has wanted to increase that to 90%, we need to make sure that we have data at our fingertips on a regular basis where we're tracking that and making sure that we're making progress to those things.
All right, I'm going to give each of you a chance to address the voters directly in sort of a closing thought about why you deserve their vote. Ms. Thomas, we'll begin with you.
Okay. Well, I would value your vote. My passion is for kids and supporting families, and have done lots of work within my own children's lives, and just am very aware that education isn't a simple thing. It doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a whole community. So I would love your vote. My website, if you want more information, it's Jennifer Spokane.com. That's Jennifer4Spokane.com. And again, vote Jennifer Thomas, please. Thank you.
And Mr. Weiser.
Well, first of all, I think our community can be proud that we have a really high-functioning school district that's creating much better outcomes each year. Our graduation rate is way up. We are reducing disproportionate discipline. We're putting in lots of different choice programs and option programs. So by and large, we have a good school system. I've been really impressed with our staff, with our schools that I've visited so far. But I think there are parents I've talked to, students, and teachers who think that who have advised there are areas we can do better in. And I think we need to have a board who continues to identify and track those issues, things like parents with special needs wanting to see more best practices, students of color wanting to see reduced disproportionate discipline, and parents who feel like their kid just isn't engaged in school. They're kind of the middle that are falling through the cracks. I think my background in engineering and business consulting and strategic planning sets me up to be able to help the district make those improvements that our community wants to make. And I've been an involved parent in the school system for over a decade, and I'm really committed to the success of Spokane Public Schools. Would really want to be retained, and would ask for your vote, and my website is wiserforschoolboard.com.
Thank you both for joining us today, and we'd like to thank Lawton Printing and the No on Prop 2 campaign for sponsoring this program. On behalf of Spokane Talks Online, I'm John Allison, thanking you in advance for voting this November. Goodbye.